Hi everyone, welcome to Toni on Real Estate Education. I am a state certified real estate teacher. I teach the 77-hour real estate salesperson's course that is needed to get your real estate salesperson's license. I personally teach the day and night classes. I have been teaching the course for the last 8 years. If anyone is interested in taking my classes or purchasing my ebook, my information is in the About section of every video. Okay, so let's dive right into test taking strategies. If I had $1 for every time one of my students told me that they weren't good test takers, I would be rich. And I'm here not to make fun. Some people really are just not great at taking tests. I'm no psychologist, but in my opinion, first, it is good to acknowledge that not being a great test taker is a real thing. It does actually exist. But here's the thing. You are not alone. You are not the only one experiencing this. Plenty of people have anxiety over test taking. Okay, so let's figure out a way to combat this anxiety. Let's be strategic. Let's get ahead of the anxiety. Let's get a plan going. Because really, there is nothing like getting a good grade on an exam. The feeling is unparalleled. And by the way, not taking the exam is not an option. So what do we do first? How about study? Let's study to make sure that we feel confident when we are taking the exam. If you don't prepare for the exam, well, then of course you will be anxious. There's no getting around that. On the other hand, if you put the time into studying and you really feel like you know the material, you will do fine. My father used to say, what you put in, you get out. He would say a test is something that you should be looking forward to. It's a way of proving that you know the material, and it's true. My adult students are famous for telling me that they try to study, but then they fall asleep. Not to sound too harsh, but something is very wrong if you're falling asleep while you're studying. Studying looks nothing like your head down and eyes closed on your desk. This, however, can be fixed. Here is one of my study techniques. I get a blank sheet of paper and I write down 10 terms and their definitions, which usually takes up one side of a page. I fold the paper, hiding the term, only seeing the definition. I read the definition and say what the term is out loud without looking. Once I got that down, I move on to the second term. But I don't go on to the second term without first going back up to the top, looking at number 1 and making sure I know it without looking. Then I study number 2. Before I move on to number 3, I go back up to the top, make sure I know number 1 and 2 without looking, then I study number 3. Once I know number 3, back up to the top. I make sure I know 1, 2, and 3 without looking before I start studying number 4. And I keep doing that over and over again. Before I move forward, I go back up to the top. When to study? I think that depends on the individual. I consider myself a morning person. The morning is my favorite time of day. I think the clearest. I like to do everything that is important first thing in the morning. If it were me, I'd get up extra early, grab a cup of coffee, and put in at least 45 minutes of studying before my day begins. Just in case something comes up, I know that studying is already behind me. Having said that, studying and reviewing should be done at least twice a day. Getting in a few minutes of studying before bed is often suggested. It's most often the quietest time in the home, allowing for less distractions. Exam location. Before the exam, make sure you do a dry run to see exactly where the location is. Driving to the location and looking at the building and room where you will be taking your exam will demystify that part of the testing. Relieving the stress in any way on that day is important. Arrive early at your test location. Nobody can predict traffic. It may take you 35 minutes to get to the test site on an average day. But what if there is an accident? You want to leave plenty of room to get to your destination should something unexpected happen. Rushing equals anxiety. That's a no-brainer. Oh, and by the way, many of my students have told me that if you are 1 minute late for the real estate state exams, the proctors will not let you in. So leave early. Get there early. Don't put yourself in that kind of unnecessary stress. The real estate exams, both the school and the state, are timed. So I always suggest to my students that they should pass up the questions that they don't know. Be sure, of course, to make note of them so you can return to them later. Here's what happens when you only do the questions that you know first. You end up getting into a flow, or what I like to call a rhythm. You are building up confidence in yourself, one question at a time. It is known that many test creators make the first 10 questions difficult to answer, knowing that it could throw the student off track right from the start. I know that's very mean, and I would never do that for sure. I hope I don't lose anyone with this next test-taking strategy that I use for really almost anything. I meditate. Maybe not in the traditional sense, but it helps. Once again, I get up early when the house is nice and quiet. I sit in my favorite chair, of course, with my coffee. I close my eyes and imagine myself taking the exam. I feel good about each question. Every question that I know, I build up my confidence, and I am the first to leave the exam feeling great, knowing that I passed with ease. And now, of course, you can go into much more depth, but this is more or less what I would do. As we know, our minds are very powerful. There have been studies with athletes that show that the body reacts to exercise in a similar way, whether on the field working out or imagining the workout. Studies also have shown that musicians, imagining themselves practicing their instruments, will benefit as if they had their instruments in their hands. I actually know this personally. I do this quite often. One last strategy that I have used for test taking as well as for lecturing in front of a large group of people. Here's what I do. I psych myself up. The best way for me to explain it is to imagine a fighter in a ring. Right before the fight begins, the fighter is jumping up and down, shaking off any nerves, any anxiety right before the fight. The fighter is anxious to get the show on the road and kick the heck out of their opponent. Psych yourself up. Don't let those nerves get the better of you. Fight them off. You can do this.